All right, hello and welcome back to Frank's World. I realized that I hadn't streamed in quite some time, and part of that is because, well, been quite busy, had been traveling, and also had completed something for my family. We actually adopted. We had a little boy come live with us who's a cousin last summer, and we officially adopted him about a week ago. And then when I went to stream, I realized that the last time I streamed was February 14th, which is of course Valentine's Day, and today is of course um, Pi Day or 314. Some people prefer to do it in July, 7/22. Um, but Pi Day is why not today, right? And tomorrow is the Ides of March. Um, so this got me thinking. Um, this had got me thinking about demanding transparency in AI. So last Sunday, this would have been March 3rd, I had spoken at Tech Day Pakistan, which when I volunteered to speak at it, the organizers are great. I just didn't take into account the time zone. So it was up at like 2 in the morning presenting. And apparently my Comcast was planning on doing maintenance, so my internet was going on and off. Because who's going to be on the internet at that time on a Sunday? But in any case, had a great conversation, and the topic was um, basically the advantages of open source AI. And I was going to do a live stream on this eventually, but um, one of the things that motivated me was this post by Oliver I saw today. And I don't think I shared the audio. I shared it, right? You can watch his post, you can watch this. But basically, it's the CTO of OpenAI at a loss for words. I'll be kind to explain what data was used to train. I think they were talking about Sora. And one, I think she was put on the spot. But two, very clearly, she went into this interview with very little prep. I mean, it's obvious, right? And when you're the CTO and there's this many eyes on you in a company like that, they really need to put them all through through media training. Um, and this in particular was interesting is that the body language, and I'm not picking on her, but this is serious stuff. If we mess up the implementation of AI, we're messing up the next century. Like, no, I mean, no exaggeration, right? Our dependence on oil, good, bad, and different, for whatever reason, started a century ago. Actually, a little more than a century ago now, but you get the idea, right? These decisions have a time to have a say a tendency to echo um, over long periods of time, over the decades. To quote the line in Gladiator movie, right? You know, what we do in life echoes in eternity. I think there's some truth to that. So, in that spirit, I've decided to share the presentation that I gave at Tech Day Pakistan. And let's go to the slides. So, empowering AI innovation and the critical role of open source in it all. Um, navigating the future together. Let's see, I'll go through. It's going to show the animation. Yes, I am an AI MVP. I am not at the summit this week because of said personal obligations. Um, and there we go. There I am on LinkedIn. Now, your first thought is, Frank, don't you work at Red Hat? What's your connection here to open source? And I myself went through a very circuitous route to becoming a fan of open source tech. And I realize I can't see the comments as they come in. So bear with me. Um, and you're right, it is kind of funny for me to, um, as someone who was a Silverlight developer who preferred Silverlight over open over HTML. It is kind of funny for me to do this, but I think this is important. I did have this kind of aha moment on the importance of open source. While I'm doing shameless plug, this is Andy and I are pleased to announce that we're at 359 shows. You can actually watch the shows now. If you go there, you can check out that link. I'll make sure I post the link later. We're in the middle of planning season 8, which is kind of crazy. All right, so with that in mind, let me get some water. Whenever I talk about AI, I like to step back and think somewhat holistically, because it's important to keep the big picture in mind. And the big picture is that AI doesn't live in a vacuum. AI is very much a product of data science, right? How good your data science practice is going to determine how good your AI is, and how good your services are. Data lakes, RDBMSs, Kafka streams, etc., determine how good your data science can be, right? And this is, I think, an opportunity for governance. So I may need to modify the slide a bit. And obviously storage, networking, all that stuff underneath it. All of this has to be done in a secure manner, which I tend to think of governance as an aspect of security, right? If you don't know the data that you used, you don't know. Is there poison data in there? Is there fake information in there? There's just a lot you don't know if you don't know. And we really are at a critical juncture. You can still hear my voice is a little crackly. In terms of society, right? You're hearing about the impact of AI in any number of fields, from blue collar work to white collar work, to resume, applicant tracking systems, right? Do they have biases in them? I don't know. And how does this work? Like, what's going on here, right? Elon Musk has sued OpenAI and Sam Altman for what he calls flagrant breaches of contract. Basically, OpenAI was meant to be open, and there are a lot of things. They're very smart. They're very brilliant. They make a lot of money, but open is not an adjective I would use to describe them. I would also like to add the controversy that Google had a week or two ago, where they had to pause AI image generation of people. They've since added in, if you don't ask for a person, you ask for pictures of dogs and cats, it'll do that. But it pauses the AI generation because of some of the controversies they had. And most disturbingly, a gentleman in Texas had been arrested because he was accused of robbing, I think, a sunglass hut. Because the facial recognition camera, which from what I've been able to read has been a very low quality image, said that he was he had robbed the store, which is categorically false, because the guy was, I think he was either incarcerated or hospitalized out of state. So he had a real solid alibi there, right? It wasn't just like, oh, I was at my friend's, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. No, he was actually, wherever he was, there was actual proof by an established trusted source that he was there and on another side of the country, right? So he was clearly had a solid alibi, yet he was arrested just the same. That's a problem. And how are these models trained, right? Don't know. Don't know what data was used. Don't know, right? And this basically the too long didn't watch of that interview with the CTO of AI. I forget her name, of OpenAI, right? Basically, that is the short of it. How was this? What mechanisms were used in training? I don't know. Do you know? They're not very open about it, right? What's the model look like? What's the governance around the model? Don't know. And again, we really are at the crossroads here, right? There are big concerns about this: ethics, fairness, privacy, security, accuracy, and probably a whole bunch of other things I can't list here, right? Because I just didn't think of them, right? Now, how does open source help with this? Well, open source projects have a certain layer of transparency and collaboration, just at a base level. I know it's not perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect, but because there's an open source project or there's some kind of openness about it, you get a baseline of transparency that you are not guaranteed with proprietary solutions. And I say this as someone who's written a book on Silverlight, who spent a lot of time and effort getting really good at Windows app development for Windows Phone. But in both those cases, while there was a strong, thriving community, the fate of those platforms were well outside of our hands and was what not made in a mechanism that I would call collaborative, trustworthy, or transparent. And that's all I'll say on that today. So I think the future of AI needs to be done in a far more open manner. You're seeing a lot of legislation being passed. I think the AI Act was ratified in Europe. Not saying that that's a great piece of legislation, but it is what it is that if we don't, as technologists and experts in the field, step up today and have a say in what our future looks like, then the government is going to do it by default. They may or may not have you and I and society's best interest at heart, right? And there needs to be a symbiotic relationship between AI development and open source. Now, the good news is, for the most part, we're most of the way there. A lot of the research in this field is already available as publicly published research. Publicly published research. Say that 10 times fast. So ultimately, but we also have a lot of the tooling is actually also based on open source tech, right? If you think of virtually anything that you would use in your day-to-day life as a data scientist or an AI engineer, there's some connection to open source, right? The biggest elephant in the room is probably Databricks and Spark, but also Python is open source, PyTorch, TensorFlow, Spark. Name me a tool or platform you use, and I would say 9 times out of 10, if not more, it's based on some kind of open source project, which is good. Now, what does OpenAI look like? And then in this context, I like to point out that there is a space between the open and the AI, which ironically, OpenAI is not very open. So really, in my mind, it consists of 4 components: open source, open access, open data, and open weights. Open source, right? The tools are open. Refers basically to models or software where the source code is available for public use, modification, distribution. This is what promotes transparency and collaboration and innovation. Open access, I would say, is that the research papers are open. The materials that are being done. Now, in terms of the tooling, right? The tooling is largely open source. The access to the research is also largely open source. Now, this is something that is yes and no is open, right? There is a lot of data sets that have been made available, largely from government sources, largely from various organizations, where the data sets are made available, they're published, but how this data is used needs to be documented in terms of how these models are being trained on. If you are asked by the Wall Street Journal or any large media outlet that is, hey, what data was this model trained on? And you kind of shrug and say, I don't know, and it's your company that's doing it, that's not a good look. And maybe there's more context to the interview, Maybe it was kind of a setup. Maybe it was a hit job. You never know, right? I'll give her the benefit of a doubt, but it's not a good look to be able to say I don't know and I don't want to talk about it. That is not. It's even more ironic when your name of your company has the word open in it. But there's also this notion of open weights, which is you don't really. This is something that is still very new and still evolving. But it's the idea that the weights that you expose the model, right? So you can see the weights. And this makes AI more accessible to smaller companies and researchers. This will do a good job to democratize the technology. Will also help smaller organizations and other organizations uh, be able to modify and fit it to their specific need. And for the most part, it largely protects the intellectual property of the creator. Why do I say that? Well, for the most part, let's pick on Facebook. Facebook has an enormous amount of data that most people have given away freely. Um, for them, the asset is the data, not necessarily the model that they train. They also have the money to spend millions of dollars on training up these models. This can, about to cough. Uh, this is live, folks. Um, this largely protects the interest of the intellectual property owner because you are not exposing the entire process. You are not doing that, but you are exposing kind of the end product. Um, now, then the downside, this can potentially make it easier for folks to experiment with and remove safeguards, which of course does raise concerns about ethics and potential misuse. Now, let's talk about ethics here. We are making the future now, and let's make sure it's a future we want to live in, let alone have our kids live in. And again, I think that the nature of open source provides a certain baseline of transparency that leads to better accountability, and that accountability will lead organizations to make better choices. Making better choices leads to a better outcome. And I forget exactly who this quote is attributed to, whether it's Peter Drucker or Abraham Lincoln. It's the idea that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And with that in mind, I encourage you all to embrace open source, particularly when it comes to training your AI models. And this is my last slide. Obviously, if you're watching this, you can scan the QR code. It goes to my LinkedIn profile. But for the most part, that's my pitch on OpenAI. It's only the second time I've delivered that talk. So first time, not at 3 a.m, but I encourage you to think very seriously about the future that we are walking into. A lot of startups, a lot of organizations, they are consuming the OpenAI model. And if you look at that video, you are inheriting all the problems along with all the good stuff that OpenAI does. I'm guilty of it too. I have OpenAI APIs. I have Claude API. I pull in stuff all the time. I have other things that I pull in. But I think that creating this in a more open way is the way forward. And I am looking forward to getting more into these open source models rather than relying on the proprietary ones. But that's basically all I got right now. I see there are no chats right now or any open questions, but feel free to hit me up. Once again, I am Frank Lavinia, and there we go. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments. Put in hashtag live if you're watching this live, or hashtag replay if you're watching this later. And that's all I got. Have a good one.